Hi there, guys. My name's Jared. I just wanted to do a video about on this knife that I created. I've been doing knife making for about 18 months now, and I started with something relatively simple and have done even some simpler blades since then. I'll try and put a picture or two up of those. But I did by far my most complicated, complex, um, I don't know, skill demanding blade that I've done up to this point. So the story behind this is I've got this Parachutist knife. It's a knife made by a company called Ontario, and I believe it was made in 1994, and it's called United States Marine Corps 94 Parachutist. And I found this at a pawn shop, and it was $30. And I was in the pawn shop or the antique store, and I was looking up this knife, trying to figure out how much it was worth. And come to find out, it's worth more than $30. And I've seen them in the $80 to $200 range. This one is, I won't say it's in mint condition, but it's completely unused. You can see the green wax there on the guard. There's also green wax on the blade. I don't know if you can really make that out. But basically, this is the wax that came on the knife when it was new, and it hasn't been used to my knowledge. I haven't used it, and it's got no scratches, it's got no damage, it's really got no signs of wear and tear. So I really didn't want to use it. So I figured I wanted to learn a little bit more about knife making. I wanted to do something more complex and more challenging than I had in the past. And so I decided that I was going to go ahead and replicate this knife as good as I could and really try and create something that looked and felt like this knife, that worked well, etc. So I could have a version of this knife that I could carry around and use and not feel bad about, or not feel like I was going to, take away the unused condition of this knife. One day I may want to sell this. So what I ended up doing was creating a version of that knife. It's a little bit different in several ways. This is made from 1080 bar stock. Like I said, this is my fifth knife, so there are definitely some things that I could have done better. There are things that I did wrong, but all in all, it turned out to be a working, stable. The guard's not flopping around and shaking, and the handle is in relatively solid condition. I used the tap and die set, and this pommel is actually screwed on, and it's epoxied on. I mean, it's solid. This is a solid knife, and so this is the one I'm going to use. Now there are some differences, and I want to show that to you. I decided, and I'm sure you can see the length difference there. I decided that I wanted it to be a longer knife because my hand fit around this a little too much, and it just seemed a little too small. It feels good, but this is better, and I wanted it to be longer because my fingers wrap around that knife better than they do this one. It's like it wants to go over that edge there. This was obviously, you can see that there's a fuller on the original and there's not a fuller on my knife. That's just something that I did not dare. Once I filed this blade, this is not I didn't use a belt sander or a grinder or anything. I actually don't have one. I have a Harbor Freight bench belt grinder, let's say, with like a 42-inch belt. And I ended up using a file and a jig on a wooden table to do this blade, and I did not want to ruin it by attempting a fuller, which is something I've never done. I did it on a couple practice pieces of the 1080 metal that I bought, and it just didn't turn out very good. It was not anywhere near as precise as this one. So I left the fuller out. But the blade turned out to be nearly exact in terms of specs. I'm not even sure if this is false edge. I did that. It was the first time doing a guard with a through tang for me. I used these spacers here that I got from Jant Supply. I cut this leather myself into like 1-inch by 1-inch squares. I also cut the spacers down to 1-inch by 1-inch squares. Did spacers on the bottom. I did my own version of the pommel. Because I used the tap and die set, you can see that that's quite a bit deeper or taller than the original. And the reason I did that is because I needed to drill, well, first of all, I wanted this knife to be longer, but that was mainly the handle part. This part ended up being bigger because I used a tap and a die set, and I had to drill a hole 3/4 of the way down, so the threads would catch and they would create a stable connection there. I also used epoxy to obviously put the entire handle together, the guard, the pommel, everything. And it turned out pretty solid. I'm really happy with the way it turned out. You can see how shiny this handle is. This is my first time doing a stacked leather handle, as I mentioned. This looks like, a piece of wood with stripes in it. It's all very smooth. It's shiny. I probably should have waited before I put oil and wax on this handle. You can tell it's a little more dull, but and if I could show you, you could see that between each of the little leather pieces, there's little grooves, I guess. So it's not entirely flat, like a flat sanded piece of wood like this looks like. But it turned out relatively good, and it doesn't look bad. It looks a little more rugged than refined. But I'm happy with the way it turned out. So I guess what I'd ask of you guys, if you have any advice on how I could do the fuller next time. This blade is obviously heat treated, so I'm not going to do a fuller on this one. But a fuller like this, I would love to learn how to do that low risk. So there's not a risk of me, or a good risk of me messing up the blade after I've already filed or sanded down the blade, and to mess it up with the fuller would be, a little bit sad. But anything that you can see on this that I could have done differently or could have done better, I would love to hear it. If anyone wants to know any more about how I did this knife, please let me know. And I really appreciate you watching the video, and I'll see you next time.